Hello everyone, we are live. This is Marcel broadcasting from Besigheim in Germany. Besigheim is a small village close to Stuttgart. If you just are in the near of it, always just give me a visit. There is a reason that we have this webinar today. This is the last webinar of the year 25. And actually the main reason is not only that it's my favorite topic. So this is something I always was completely passionate about. No, we updated one of the most important documents we have at Genelec, and this is the so-called monitor setup guide. So hopefully you have heard of this document before. In case you haven't, this is your chance to then just grab the most recent version, which will be available soon. We will share the link with you and then you can download it. It's available in English right from the start, and other language versions will become available soon. German is almost ready, and hopefully it will be available for you soon as well. Yeah, and today's webinar will somehow cover all of the topics that we cover in the monitor setup guide, which is how to optimize your listening setup, how to understand which speakers you should choose, and especially how to somehow, find a good compromise with your room acoustics, because this is what it's all about. Sometimes we cannot change the room we are working in. Sometimes we can. Sometimes we can use acoustic treatment, which is always, the most important part of proper listening. And we want to dive into this, somehow huge field of information. I am trying my best to be not too long, but I think it can be around 75 to 90 minutes. So just be prepared, get yourself a cup of tea and some cookies. Hopefully it's worth it. Otherwise, you can of course watch the video later on with 1.5 speed. I was practicing that right from the start. I cannot do it. So this is the regular speed, and hopefully you will have fun with this webinar. Of course, we will have a Q&A in the end, as always, so you can just type in your questions on the platform you are watching this on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and then I will go through the comments and I will just choose some of them for the live Q&A, and otherwise, of course, we will take care that we will reply to them after this live webinar. So every question will be answered for sure. Great, then let's start and bring up PowerPoint. There's always PowerPoint involved. So this is actually, I think it's not Isalmi at the moment. I saw a few pictures. There was snow, but it was not that beautifully white. It was more like the gray snow, but it can look like this there in wintertime, of course, still. It's no longer the case in most places in Germany, for example. But still, this is not recommended, so don't place your speaker in the snow. This is advertisement and not a recommended placement. Great. Then I will have to do this, just a second. Yeah, now my clicker is also working. The main question is always, how can we achieve a so-called sonic reference? Because, this is what we promise. If you see our logo, it's always with this sentence, the sonic reference. But we do our best that you already have some kind of a sonic reference, because the speakers are manufactured as good as possible to offer you the chance to get just, excellent audio playback in almost any environment. But still, of course, you will find out within this webinar, there are a lot of other things that play an important role. And we try to teach you about that, because this is usually the key to get your own sonic reference. This one is some kind of a classic, the quote of the day. I always start with that if it's about this topic, because it's just brilliant. It's by Aki Makivirta, our CTO. This is the new title, our R&D director, and it's just physics stay on version 1.0, and that's a very good statement in different context. Also a very valid statement. We all know that there are some things going on sometimes in the audio industry. You could think about that the physics are no longer valid, but actually it's not true. So there's always an explanation for something that is happening on an acoustic basis. And this is why I think sharing technical facts is very important. Yeah, this is how it looks like, our nice new monitor setup guide with a new cover. We have updated a lot of the graphics because some of them had been a little misleading sometimes. So we try to improve that. And yeah, I will of course start with a huge thanks to all of the people who had been involved in this new setup guide. So especially our visual designers, for example. It's not always that easy if we ask for something and then explain something, for example, in terms of physics, and then you have to find a nice way of showing it in an easy to understand way in a graphic or something, or a drawing. Actually, what are we listening to if we listen to something? It always starts with the audio source. Then we have the loudspeaker, then we have the room, and then we have us. So of course, all of us are different. You might know, for example, if you had been mixing all night long and you thought this is the best mix, you know, that I ever did. Then you sleep for a few hours and you check it again, you will realize it's different. So of course, also your brain is of huge importance if it's just about yeah, evaluating audio. But our main focus today will be loudspeaker and room, and especially the room, because with the loudspeaker, as said, we can help you with delivering really good products. But the room is something, yeah, everyone has to somehow, yeah, has to evaluate first of all. So everyone should understand what her or his room is doing to the sound or to the way he listens to audio in general. What would be ideal would be a somehow linear response. So linear from the source to your ears. And actually, I have to say this is pretty impressive. I'm always just thinking it's very, very good, you know, R&D work that, for example, our 8351B looks like this. So as you see, this is within a tolerance of plus minus 0.5 dBs. But what is the background of this one? It's somehow measured in a room like this. And this is, of course, not a regular room. This is the so-called anechoic chamber. By the way, the photo is not our chamber. Ours is a little smaller, but it's just a nice one where you can see how the construction of a chamber like this works. So we have huge pillars with absorptive material that and even if you build a very, very, you know, advanced room, it just might be possible that you still get some reflections. But these rooms are actually very good for research, for evaluating things. They are not that nice to be in because it's just very unnatural for human beings that you don't hear any reflections, and especially usually that you don't hear any sound from the outside, because the soundproofing of these chambers is also very, very good. And what you see on the bottom is a grid floor to also somehow eliminate or reduce the reflections from the floor. And within these wonderful chambers, we can achieve these beautiful looking frequency responses, which actually just show that a speaker like the 51B is constructed that it can, of course, deliver you a neutral and linear sound. Because actually we don't know in what room this will be used or in what environment. So this is somehow the best we can do, and then other things become important. In a real room, of course, sound is reflected by almost all surfaces. So first of all, walls, the ceiling, floors, but of course also your desk, your console, screens, furniture, almost everything you have in a room will reflect the sound. Usually you can, as you see it here in this image, we have an angle. The sound hits, for example, the wall at this angle, and it will have the same angle then for the reflection. This is true for mid and high frequencies. For bass frequencies, it's different because the wavelengths are so long, then it's more like pressure differences. So you cannot really visualize that. in this way. So the reality, for example, in my room, I'm standing here right now, is the red curve. This is a 41, also looks almost as good as the 51 in the anechoic chamber, but look at this red curve. And this is only because of the acoustics of my room. So for example, at 130 Hertz, I would have approximately 18 dBs too much, which of course is a huge problem if I want to mix something, because it will also mask everything that's happening above and below that frequency range. So very easy to say, with this red curve, I could not do a mix. Although I have a really good speaker, I would be completely lost. The good thing, of course, is with the 51, the 41 and all of these speakers, they are SAM speakers, and you already know, or you might know, that they can be calibrated with our GLM software. So you see this blue curve that somehow helps with the problems of the room, because the green curve is very acceptable. So this is something we'll talk about later. And I promise I will also show you how you can get similar, of course not the same, but similar results with speakers that don't have DSPs, just by using software like Room EQ Wizard. This is a room without any acoustic optimization, and you see, once again, we get a lot of reflections, and these reflections somehow form a diffuse sound field. So they will just add up, and at your listening position, of course, you are not only listening to the direct sound from the speakers, but with a short time difference, more and more reflections also show up somehow at your listening spot, and they somehow do an overlap with the direct sound, and this can cause problems. For example, cancellations, comp filtering, but also boosts, so that some frequencies are just boosted. Just to show this to you in short, with surfaces like walls, for example, or made out of wood or of concrete and stuff like that, we usually have so-called hard surface or hard surface for sound, which just means that all of the sound is reflected. So nothing is passing through. The complete energy somehow is reflected. As you know, sound is not traveling in the form of arrows. It's more like, that you get a density between the air molecules, and then, these pressure differences, they travel through the air. And for example, if they get closer to a wall, you will have a lot of pressure there. And then the other way around, this pressure difference will then travel back from the wall into your room. So this is what happens with hard surfaces. Absorption is something we can make use of, and which is absolutely appreciated if it's about room acoustics and treatment, because absorption allows the sound somehow to go through a material, for example, a mineral wool or foam or stuff like that. It can also be your old sofa. This also acts like an absorber, not in a controlled way, but it does. And so the energy of the sound is just reduced. So before it's reflected, the energy is reduced, or if, for example, the material is thick enough, it can happen that the complete energy is absorbed, so no reflections are happening. This is absorption. Then we have diffusion. This is something that makes use of some kind of uneven surfaces, or irregular surfaces that scatter the sound waves. You can already, I think, explain to yourself that this is not working for bass frequencies, because with bass you have very long, this is my daughter by the way, with a bass you have very long wavelengths, and of course then these small differences don't make any difference. So a wavelength of 2, 3, 4, 5 meters, of course, is not influenced at all by a diffuser. So diffusion is working for high frequencies and mid frequencies, and can be used, for example, to get a smaller room a little more, for example, lively. So in studios, for example, you record drums. Drums usually sound best in really large rooms. And if you don't have a room like that, you can use some kind of diffusion that gives you a similar, not the same, but a similar field of scattered waves. So a large room usually has this, that you have reflections, for example, wide reflection angles, and also a really diffuse field, compared to, for example, a hard reflection that is only, angle in, angle out. So this is the use of diffusion. I would like to point out that usually if you want to optimize your room, especially for mixing, producing, but also at home for hi-fi listening, diffusion, in my opinion, is not that important. These things look very nice because they're usually well made, but broadband absorption is always the best way to start. You can, of course, add diffusion later on, but don't be afraid of that the room might sound too somehow, dead. This was the word I was looking for, too dead in the end, because especially in a usual environment like a living room, there are so many surfaces still left that reflect sound. This is not an issue. So if you have a budget, then spend most of it on so-called broadband absorption, which is usually absorbers and bass traps. And then, of course, you can find combinations. This is also something some manufacturers are selling. So they have a surface that is acting as a diffuser, and below that there is material that is porous and that is acting as an absorber, also working. Once again, be careful if, for example, this surface is almost covered by something that is a diffuser. High and mid frequencies will be reflected, so they will not go into the absorption area of this device, which can give you problems, for example, if you place them on your first reflection points. What makes things even harder is that a speaker does not just bring the sound to us in a perfect directive way. In the bass range, every speaker is omnidirectional. So even if you have really large membranes like 15-inch, 18-inch, it's still omnidirectional. So the energy travels everywhere, which makes it hard, because this is usually not what you want, especially if your room is challenging as well. So be aware of that mid and high frequencies. Then the speaker gets more directive and you get more so-called directivity control. So we can really make sure that the sound is somehow arriving at your listening position, at your listening area, and not anywhere else. But with lower mids and especially the bass, it's always omnidirectional. Because of that, we also have this issue. I would not call it issue because we can make use of it, but let's say this is one of the effects you should be aware of. So if you bring a speaker close to a hard wall, of course, as already said, the omnidirectional sound travels towards the wall and will be reflected and adds to the direct signal without a difference, so it's in phase, and will, for example, then just result in plus 6 dB if you just see one wall with one speaker. If you get two surfaces, it can be up to 12 dB, and with three surfaces close to the speaker, up to plus 18. So in reality, usually it's not plus 18, luckily, but this effect is very obvious. I'm always making this joke when I'm having my lectures with students. For example, if you are a bass lover, so you are in love with bass frequencies, you can always make this nice appointment with someone, lover of bass meets other lover of bass in the corner. So this is the best way of meeting at a disco, or because in corners you have the most bass. If you only have a small Bluetooth speaker and still want to do a party, place it in a corner. As I said, it's not only about large surfaces like walls, it's also about desks and consoles. And because consoles on desks have a different dimension compared to a wall, it's also a different frequency range that is somehow affected. So for desks, it's usually around something like, we wrote down 130 to 250. This is a typical range. And if you have analog speakers from us, you might know there is a desktop dip switch, which exactly reduces this range. Because it's not nice, especially, for example, if you listen to vocals, they just might sound a little, too muddy in this range, and then the clarity is gone. So important to think about this one. The somehow evil villain of room acoustics are the room modes, or the so-called standing waves. This is just a very short, definition. I don't go into the details. Actually, it's about, you have a wavelength that is matching exactly the dimensions of your room. And then, of course, it's just traveling always between the same points. And if it's, for example, multiples of this wavelength, you will easily find out that you have maximums and minimums in the room. So if you start walking around your room, it's very obvious at one spot you have a lot of bass, then there's almost no bass, then again a lot of bass. And this is what makes it so hard to find the right placement for speakers and also for yourself, so for you as a listener, because these standing waves can color everything, so they can have a huge influence on how we listen. In case you don't want to calculate all of these on your own, there is a wonderful calculator. I should show this before that. It's called AmRock. By the way, we will, of course, also, I think we'll just paste the links from this webinar into, for example, the description in YouTube, then you can easily find them. This is a very, very useful tool because, first of all, you can visualize modes. By the way, this is still my daughter. I don't know if she also wants to have a webinar. And you can visualize where the maximums and the minimums are. And this is very interesting because you can see it starts relatively easy, so that you have a maximum, for example, at one wall and the other one at the other wall. But then within the room, it can get pretty complicated depending on the mode you are looking at. And this tool is brilliant because you just can enter the size of your room. For example, this one is 4 meter by 3 meter and 2.50 meters high. And then you see these nice lines, and every line shows a modal frequency. If you place your mouse on top of one of these lines, it will be played back. So you can, for example, listen to this 42.8 hertz I just selected here. And at the same time, you can see in this room 3D view where the maximums are. So blue and red are both maximums. They are using two colors. Just if the pattern gets more complicated, you can still, differentiate between them. So this is a wonderful tool to find out. And what you can also already see, luckily somehow, the modal impact only is really a problem in the bass range. If you just look at this range now to above 200 hertz, for example, it's getting more dense and it's just more modal influences, and they also have not that impact anymore. So they don't have this huge coloring effect that happens in the bass range. But in the low end, as said, they are the evil villain. I already mentioned this beautiful software because it's very useful and it's free. That's the cool thing. I can always only encourage you to donate if you use this software often, because the guys, or mainly the guy who's running it, is doing a fantastic job, because this is one of the best softwares you can find to just evaluate acoustics. So to do simple measurements and get all the data you need for somehow making the right decisions. So this is called Room EQ Wizard, and you can find it under roomeqwizard.com. And the only thing you then need in addition is a computer, an audio interface, or a sound card which offers a microphone input, and then a simple measurement microphone, ideally on a stand. Yeah, this helps. And I really mean simple. We compared very expensive measurement microphones with inexpensive ones. And usually, as you will see later, we focus on the bass range, on the lower mids. And remember my room, it was plus 17 or plus 18 dBs too much. Even if it would be plus 17 or plus 16, it's not a huge difference. Really expensive measurement microphones, of course, have the huge advantage that they are perfectly similar in the mid frequencies and high frequencies as well. And you can buy, for example, 5 of them and they will perform exactly the same way. This is not the case with these microphones below 50 euros, but you can use them for what we want to do here. And this is how you perform the measurement. You set up the microphone at listening position. You connect the microphone to the interface input and the interface output to the loudspeaker, because Room EQ Wizard will send a sweep signal. So this is the standard measurement signal to just ensure we have from lowest bass to highest heights, everything covered and everything is analyzed, because the sweep in the ideal world should be linear, and then it's compared to what is recorded by our microphone. I can tell you already it's not linear. And then just start the measurement. And after that, you can then find these beautiful curves. This is a frequency response measured. I think it was, I don't remember. If you, for example, want to get deeper into Room EQ Wizard, just of course check out tutorials on YouTube. There are several available, also from the guy who is giving this webinar. And then, of course, everything is explained in detail. And of course, we have already optimized Room EQ Wizard tutorials for Genelec speakers, which have dip switches. And I will also share these links in the description. So you get a frequency response, and you can do A/B comparisons. For example, these are now 2 frequency responses, and you can see a green curve and a red curve. This is also done in my room. The green curve is my 41 uncalibrated, and then the red curve is measured after I did GLM calibration. So you can clearly see we are not telling lies, it works. So it's way better after the calibration. You can check early reflections with Room EQ Wizard. I will talk about that soon again. You can have a waterfall diagram, which just shows you how long frequencies ring. You will always find out that usually in the bass range, for example, where these modal influences are, a frequency just will be audible way longer, which just, can ruin your wonderful kick drum, which is no longer but more like ooh, because you have, for example, 0.6 or 0.7 seconds of decay for this frequency. And we also show this in our grade report. For those of you who do not know that already, if you're using GLM, with one click you can generate a grade report, and this is a complete room acoustics report that offers you all information. So, which of course saves you a lot of time. I can tell you, if you would like to do this with Room EQ Wizard, it's a job. Just for example, to optimize all of these diagrams and to find out the right spots you should look at, and Grade is doing this for you. And just a comparison now, you see this room, it has one longer ringing in the bass range, so at around 50 hertz, and above 100 hertz you see it's really, really short, because on this Z axis you can just see this is half of a second, so 500 milliseconds, and this modal influence is longer, but the rest of it, especially above 100, is way shorter. And now compared to this is a measurement from an untreated living room, and with lots of windows, and you can see this is a huge difference. So now we have way longer reflections and ringings also in the high frequency range, which does not sound good. This is just the problem, because it will just color the original signal, and especially Windows do color sound in a way that is usually not really beautiful. So fight Windows. Although it's beautiful to look out of them, but in acoustic context, curtains will be needed in a room like this, for example. Let's say you did a measurement. So I started with showing you Room EQ Wizard, to be honest, that you start to do a measurement, because it's always somehow for me funny to see if I'm checking forums on the internet where people are discussing endlessly about, where they should place, for example, which absorber and which bass trap and stuff. But they are only doing this theoretically. So it's just that they have a plan and they have a sketch, for example, and they think about it. Instead of course, there are basics we can discuss, but after that, you should always just do a measurement. It's so easy. Yeah, even if you're in an empty room and you have not done any treatment already, then you can somehow already find out what's the characteristics of this room. And this is the way to go with. So measurements. It's a hard word for German. But do measurements. It's really important. So let's say we have this nice measurement from my room. And I'm looking now what could cause the boost at 65 Hertz. My room dimensions are like this. So 3.9 meter, 2.7 meters, and height is not really important at the moment in this diagram, but it's 2.8 meters. You will see it now. And I just entered these values here. And quod erat demonstrandum, 63 Hertz is a modal influence, is one of the room modes. And I can also tell you that I'm sitting at the longer side of the room, which is not recommended. I had to do it because I have a window here. And as you see, there is a maximum. Blue and red show a maximum at this wall and at this wall. And yeah, I'm still in this area, of course, when I'm sitting there. And this is where this comes from. So very obvious. And also not a lot I can do because this is a small room. And for example, to get rid of a 65 Hertz wave length, I would need a lot of material, more than fits in this room. So this is a perfect example where calibration is needed. I cannot compensate that. And then you had, probably you remember, we had 130 Hertz also as a maximum. And yeah, this is also one of these modal influences. And now you see it's also with one maximum in the middle of the room. This is why I should not sit in the middle of the room. We'll also discuss this soon, because then I would be in this maximum. What could be the reason for something like this, so that we see a notch? Usually, these notches are caused by, once again, of course, it can be caused by a modal influence, because as you know, there are maximums, there are also minimums. But these relatively narrow notches in the bass range usually can be just seen as a so-called speaker boundary interference response. It's a beautiful, beautiful word. Speaker boundary interference response. So easily spoken, it's just a surface interacting with the loudspeaker. So we have this example in our monitor setup guide for so many years now, but it's the best way to, I think, explain it. So we have the speaker, and the speaker has a distance to the wall. And then we start the playback, and the direct sound, of course, travels from the front of the speaker to us, direct sound. As we know, we have an omnidirectional characteristic for the bass. So let's say we are listening to something that has bass. The sound is also traveling to the wall behind the speaker. By the way, this is the reason why we call it back wall. Huge discussions sometimes, I know. I also know that most people would call this the front wall because you are looking at this wall, but it's the wall behind the speaker. So for us, it's back wall, but we can discuss that. So the sound is somehow hitting this wall, it gets reflected. And then you have some kind of a destructive summation. If, this is now the only complicated thing, we have this quarter wavelength. So quarter wavelength plus quarter wavelength results in half of a wavelength, and half of a wavelength means complete cancellation. Not nice. Yeah? And this is why you can easily calculate which frequency somehow is killed by which distance. So for example, something we see relatively often, especially at home, is 1 meter. So 1 meter distance between front of the speaker and the wall behind the speaker. And this will cancel out around 86 Hertz. It's not nice. Yeah? It's a really important frequency. And the problem is that once again, you cannot do much about it. Because if you would now, for example, place some kind of an absorber to this back wall, it will never be effective for the bass. Yeah? For the bass, it would have to be more than 1, 2, 3 meters thick. If I see panels like this with 10 centimeters, they don't do anything above, below usually 300 hertz or 400 hertz. So it's really the best way to deal with that is to bring the speaker close to the wall, because we can compensate boosts. This is the very important thing. I can also explain why we cannot compensate this notch. Let's say we are getting this destructive reflection for 86 hertz. Easily, for example, minus 10 dB. Okay, you could tell me, Marcel, no problem, let's boost 86 hertz by 10 dB. First of all, the amplifier of the speaker says, yeah, because this is a lot in the bass range. But the moment you boost the direct sound, almost at the same level, it's not exactly the same, but almost at the same level, the reflection is boosted. So it will still cancel out, but you have eaten up all of your headroom for the internal amplifier, or your headroom in general, SPL-wise. So this is not a good idea. Don't try to compensate compensate notches with boosting in this range. It's not gonna work. This is just once more a way of showing what's happening. And what's also interesting to see, the closer I get to the wall with the speaker, the shorter this quarter wavelength is. This means the higher the frequency that is cancelled out is. Which means if we have a higher frequency, the speaker already gets directive. So for example, if it's 200 hertz, the speaker already has some kind of good directivity for this frequency. So it's not that critical. But if we go further away, then somehow the wavelengths on the quarter wavelengths gets longer. So the further we go away, the lower we get. But also we get really, really deep notches that are really hard to handle. So this is just a listing that you see some of the, regular problems. So for example, 1 meter is this 86 hertz, 1 meter 20, 70 hertz, 1 meter 40, 60 hertz. And you see, it takes a long time until it becomes not that relevant anymore. For example, let's say you have an 8351, a speaker that plays down to 30 hertz. Then you would have to be away 3 meters to somehow be not in the range the speaker can do. If it's a smaller speaker, for example, that only plays down to 50 hertz, then 2 meters would already work. And of course, if you have a really large room and you have the option, go for that. This can just sound really nice. But most of us, I think, we have to handle smaller rooms. And once again, as you see, if we're getting closer, on the right side, you can see that we have just notches that are not that deep anymore, and also where the speaker already is more directive. In general, if you want to calculate these SBIRs, there's a wonderful tool. It looks a little messy, I have to say, but it's wonderful. It's precise, and it can help you a lot, because you can also enter, for example, the height of your speakers and all of the parameters that are needed. And this is by Mr. Tripp from Australia. And the link will also be shared. You can also just enter SBIR calculator and you'll find it. It also includes a nice one for the so-called floor-ceiling bounce. Sometimes people don't think about that, but it's exactly the same that is happening with sidewalls or with other walls. So it's also very relevant. Especially, for example, that the floor is always one of our best buddies. The floor is very often causing us these notches at 120, 150, 160 hertz. A lot of you, I think, know that. And this is usually the floor. In most of the times, you can just only say, yes, I have to accept that. Hopefully, it's not too wide. Usually, they are narrow because the floor is still needed. Otherwise, you are in the free space. So once again, summary is place the speakers close to the wall if you don't have the chance to place them far away. And this brings us back to one of the oldest principles of studio design. The best way to place a speaker is in the wall, which is called flush mounting, because then the wall behind the speaker somehow acoustically is not existing. You will of course have to compensate the bass boost, because as said, this is the same happening there, but otherwise this is a perfect option. Especially if the wall is then angled, like you can see on the right side. This usually makes sure, for example, that the speaker is a little higher, so you get away from desks and you get away from consoles. And yeah, this can just give you really, really good results. But as we all know, who has the money nowadays? Who has the rooms nowadays? Unfortunately, it's getting harder and harder. Spotify should pay musicians better. So, there is one good thing. If you have a subwoofer, or if you want to use a subwoofer for bass management, this can give you a little more freedom with the speaker placement. Because let's say we place the subwoofer close to the wall, and this is where it belongs. Please never place it somewhere else. It always should be on the floor and exactly close to the wall. You can even turn it around. This also works. So you can have the driver facing the wall with approximately 10 centimeters distance. Sometimes this also gives even better results. And what's happening now? The subwoofer takes care of the bass range. Because the subwoofer is close to the wall, you don't see these cancellations. Because the speakers do not have to do the bass range, the cancellations on the speaker side don't matter. This is why you can have the speakers also a little further away from the wall. This can make sense, for example, if you want to have more direct sound, so if you want to be closer to a speaker, and then this is a nice option. I can just show you the results from GLM for this. This would be a measurement for the subwoofer. You see after calibration, very linear from 20 up to almost 100. And this is the speaker, and the speaker, of course, because I put it 1.20 meters away, has this notch you can clearly see. And if I now choose the crossover, then it's higher than this notch, for example, 90, 85, yeah, then this is covered. So then the complete system, as a full range system, somehow plays completely neutral. So this is a good trick, and also sometimes the reason why we recommend subwoofers. So if I see some measurements and I can also see photos, then sometimes it can be obvious that only a subwoofer could help with this installation. So once again, because it's so important, don't boost to compensate for notches. So these narrow band dips in the bass range are caused by cancellations, and you cannot somehow compensate for that with boosting. What you can do, of course, is do acoustic treatment if it's possible. For example, if you have the place for bass traps, and or of course you can sometimes think about your listening position if it's caused by a modal influence. For example, if you sit in a null in the room, for example in the middle of the room, then it could be already an advantage to get closer to the speakers, so out of this middle axis. What you can do is you can compensate for boosts. I think that makes sense. Yeah, you will just reduce the energy coming from the speaker. This will be added to the energy somehow from the reflection, and it sums up at the correct level. So this also makes it possible, for example, that your speaker plays lower. For example, if we tell you the speaker reaches 45 Hertz as minus 60 dB point in our anechoic chamber, and you bring it close to the wall, you might easily be, able to reach 40 or 38 even. So this is also just useful. You somehow use the energy of the reflection, and the speaker does not have to do it. And therefore, usually it's a good starting point, especially in small rooms, to be close to the wall or very far away. Then it's no longer a small room. So these are the two videos I was talking about. We will also link these, how to use Room EQ Wizard and how to make use of dip switches that are available, as you know, on all of our analog models. As you can see, this is also real-world measurement. So the red curve was before I used dip switches and the blue curve was after I used dip switches. So it's of course not as flexible as GLM because we cannot somehow tune to specific frequencies. But even these more or less shelving filters can be of use to bring down, for example, a wall load. So this boost effect of a wall that is close to the speaker. Yeah, and mentioning GLM, we already did, of course, a lot of webinars about that. So very, very short introduction. This is somehow, in my opinion, you know, the most clever and indeed the smartest way of handling all of these things, because the speakers have DSPs. You can calibrate with our GLM software, so you can see results instantly. It's very easy to use. Not only for stereo, but also up to more than 100 speakers at the moment. And yeah, for example, measure one speaker, change the placement, measure it again, and you can easily compare. You can also create the grade report, which is the best summary of room acoustics. Yeah, so if you have the budget for the SAM series and GLM, highly recommended. If you would ask me, what system should I go for? I would usually ask always the same questions. And this is somehow dimensions of the listening room. You already know why. Is it possible to have 3 meters distance to the walls? Or is it more like a room like mine here with 11 square meters? Then what will be your listening distance? Usually, to be honest, I ask this because then I want to tell you, get closer to the speakers, because this is almost always the right answer. I think most of you don't use a 1236. So sitting closer, you will also see that soon, is just giving you more direct sound and more clarity. Then I ask you, what genres do you mainly listen to? And how low should the system play? This is directly connected. If someone is telling me EDM, I already know it has to play low and loud, usually. Yeah. If someone is more into, I don't know, yeah, classical music, it's different. Then we need high dynamics. Then also sometimes, for example, even the self-noise of a speaker can be interesting, because these people, as I said, are listening to very, very low parts in the music. And if you then, it's hard to spot, but if you then spot some self-noise, this would not be really cool. And then, of course, what SPL do we want to achieve? Sometimes I don't get the answer. I only hear not that loud, but I can only recommend there are very good applications and apps for the smartphones that, of course, are not as precise as an SPL meter, but it's very close. Let's say 2 or 3 dB difference. I also love that, to go to restaurants and then to find out, hey, come on, it's again 90 dB at the moment here. And then I'm always wondering why nobody is wearing, you know, hearing protection except me. But of course, yeah, this is not the best way of, you know, if you just are going there for a beer, don't start this discussion that it's too loud. So, and with these questions, usually I already know a lot. And you can just contact us under support@genelec.com at any time, in case you don't know that. And you can then, of course, make use of our knowledge. But if you want to check out a few things on your own, this is also possible with the monitor setup guide, because we included a monitor performance table that just shows you the most important facts. For example, how low does the speaker play? How loud does it play? And then a recommended sub for stereo playback. And this is very important. Of course, this is we carefully thought about it, but still, sometimes it can make sense to have, for example, a sub that is a little bigger or is a little smaller. It really depends on the application. So in these cases, always just reach out to us. For example, if usually you would see 8350, we list 7370. But if you listen to, I don't know, music at 70 or 80 dB, you don't need that sub. A 7360 will also do it. And sometimes, for example, if it's about classical music again, or music that where the stereo imaging is very important, and you want to have true stereo in full range, so down to the lowest frequencies, then it could be better, for example, to get two 7360s instead of one 7370, because then you could place them close to the left and to the right speaker and just run them in stereo as well. And then you have a true stereo extension down to the lowest bass. So these are recommendations, but still, feel free to reach out. And same is true for this nice table I also just wanted to show to you, which lists almost all of our models. And we have this not recommended distances. This is the red line or the red area on the left side, which sometimes caused some confusion. It's pretty easy to understand. If a speaker is large and if the drivers are at different positions, if you are too close to the speaker, then these drivers do not sum up correctly. So it might happen that you, for example, just get too much from the tweeter compared to the mid-range or to the woofer. And this is the reason why larger speakers like 1236, 1235, you should not sit, away like half a meter or even 1 meter. Let's face it, you would not do that. If you look at the speaker, you would be afraid. So this is usually not happening. The only exception is 8381, our flagship coaxial monitor, because it's a coaxial monitor. You can sit really close to it, like easily 1 meter. And this, of course, also feels a little somehow dangerous. Yeah. And all of the other speakers, as you can see, point source speakers, you can always sit close. And smaller speakers like 8320, 8330, even half of a meter works perfectly fine. And then we have this green area where usually the best results are possible. And then at some point it gets yellow. And this is also something that is important to understand. This just means that the diffuse sound field from the room, so the reflections from the room, can become dominant. So if you have a very well-treated room, for example, this green line is longer, because there are not that many reflections happening. And if you are in an untreated bathroom, for example, the green line is very short. Usually, I don't know, no longer than 1 meter. And the last thing you can see here is just for your feeling that, of course, the SPL changes if you get further away. So, for example, if you get this 100 dB at 1 meter, then it's approximately, it can be 6 dBs lower at double the distance, but usually it's not that critical, because in addition the room already works in a helping way at this moment, so the SPL level does not drop that much. So the values you see here are calculated on the basis of real rooms. And but once again, reach out. So you already know a lot now. So what would be a good starting position if you are just planning your setup in your room? Usually go for the shorter side if it's in a rectangular room. A room that has, the square as the basis is critical, because room modes love symmetries, and square is very symmetrical. If you then have the same, height, then congratulations. This is then the most hardest thing to handle. So, but in a rectangular room, usually sit on the shorter side, and then just divide the room in thirds. And one of the best starting points is usually go in this first third, so as your sitting position or your listening position. And as I said, speakers, of course, close to the wall. And on the right side, you see something that just shows you more than 1 meter. This just wants to illustrate that you should sit away from walls. So stay away from walls. So because if you are getting closer than 1 meter to a wall, you will always be in the area where we already have a boost usually. So where it's just more pressure from bass frequencies, and this is not ideal to sit there. So this is the reason why you should stay away. It can be challenging sometimes at home, for example, in a hi-fi environment, and you're sitting on your sofa, and then you are just leaning towards the wall behind you, and your head is actually touching it. With calibration, it's still doable, but perhaps it could be the better option to just go slightly more into the room towards the speaker. If you are not going for the shorter side of the room, for example, as I did, then it's the same. Just go for thirds and just align usually still on a symmetrical axis. This is, to be honest, something that can be discussed also because we spoke about it. You know, the room modes love symmetry. So if I'm sitting on 1/3, but then in the middle of the other axis, you could still discuss that this is a symmetry for the side walls. That's true. And of course can only be then proven right or wrong when you do your measurements. But just thinking about the stereo image works best if you really get almost the same from left and right speaker. This also means almost the same reflections or reflection patterns from left and right. And this is usually, of course, the case if you are in a symmetrical, if you have set it up in a symmetrical way. This is something that is very important. Still, sometimes I see it in a different way. But if you want to have the correct panorama, for example, from a classical recording, or if you are producing stuff, please go for the equilateral triangle. So make sure that you have these 60 degrees angles, or 2 × 30 if you just look from your perspective. And this is really essential, because if you go wider, it of course might give you an impression of a really wider stage, which is nice. But for example, the phantom center, let's say you have really nice, dry, intimate vocals that should be pinpoint in the center, so in the middle between both speakers. This will not work that well. And if some of the speakers are too close to each other, then of course you just lose the fantastic, width of the stage. What's important for the speaker alignment are so-called acoustic axes. Axes, what's the plural there? Axes. And this is just somehow a line that, of course, is not there in reality, that shows you where the drivers sum up correctly. And this line should always point towards you or your ears. And you can see for a two-way system, this is top left, this line is between tweeter and woofer. If it's a point source, it's very easy. It's just starting at the center of the coaxial driver. And if it's a classical three-way system we also have, then it's also between tweeter and mid-range. You know why? Because the wavelengths of the woofers are very long and they are not that critical compared to what's happening in the mid and high frequencies. So always align these acoustic axes on your towards your ears. What could help you with that are stands. For example, table stands that just make it possible to bring up the speaker slightly, also towards ear height, or make it easier to angle the speaker. And of course also regular floor stands that are then used with our, for example, this is the 409 that just uses different stand plates. So for every model we have a stand plate and you can just attach it, and then just the isopod matches this stand plate. You can use the isopod for tilting. I think this is also known. Make use of that. And sometimes we get the question, is it okay that the speaker is higher than ear height? Yes, it is. As said, it sometimes can make sense. If you think about the flush mount installations in larger studios, most of them are always having the speakers at a higher position. The recommendation from the ITU is not more than 15 degrees, but this is also something that just should be checked. If it's just too high, you will realize that you start mixing like that, which is not very, not very cool. And if you have multiple speakers, for example, also 5.1, 7.1, 7.14, ideally you should also align the acoustic axis of these different monitors that it matches. This is, for example, interesting to see with this lower image where it's showing a center variant of this speaker, and then just make sure that, for example, high and mid frequencies are aligned. One important thing also, you can always see this in various clips on YouTube and in I don't know how many publications, but don't use two-way systems. in horizontal position. This does not make any sense. So they are built and they are supposed to be used vertically. And this is why it's always about the correct summation of the two drivers, so the tweeter and the bass driver. And if you move, the distance between your ears and these drivers can change, of course. And usually you move on this axis while mixing. And this is the axis where a two-way system that is placed vertically does not show any problems. So there is not any issues. It shows some issues if you start moving like that, so up and down. But as said, you usually don't do that. The moment you have the speaker placed horizontally, you somehow transfer the problem to this area. And then you get comp filtering at the crossover frequency, like you can see here in the diagram. So don't do that. It's acceptable. It's acceptable for a center speaker. For example, if you have two speakers on your TV and then you add a center speaker and you don't have the space to have it, vertically, then it's okay, because the center speaker alone usually does not cause these issues, because it's a dedicated signal. It's also usually dialogue and stuff, and you don't get these more complex comp filterings in the stereo image. So this is doable, but not for stereo use. Already mentioned, if you ask me, where should you sit? And then I always tell you close. And sorry, this is not because all speakers are near-field monitors. This is a terminology that is mainly somehow based on that you had main monitors. They had been built into the wall, and then you usually had a second pair of speakers closer to you on the console, for example. And this was called near field. So it's more like an application. But every speaker, of course, has more direct sound if you are closer to it. And every speaker somehow is influenced more by the room if you are further away. So this is just what we show here. You have direct sound, and the further you are away, somehow you lose the energy of the direct sound, but at the same time the diffuse sound of the room, builds up. And then there is just one point where the diffuse sound gets dominant. And this is, of course, not critical at all if I'm watching, TV and I'm sitting 3 meters away from 80/20s. I can perfectly handle that. But if I'm doing critical mixing decisions or just want to listen to music in the, really high fidelity way, then try it out to be closer. Yeah, and now let's just have a short look at, I will also have to check the time. Oh, okay. I speed up. What can we do with room acoustic treatment? Because it's the only way to handle the time domain. So we have seen frequency response, and we have seen that we, for example, can compensate with a filter for a boost in a specific frequency response. That's possible. But I cannot compensate, for example, for early reflections that are coloring my sound, or I cannot compensate for a diffuse sound field in the room. All of these things are only somehow can only be compensated by using acoustic treatment. And this is why, of course, you should make use of it if it's possible. This is just how I would visualize it. This is also from the grade report. You always have direct sound and diffuse sound, which is in this case 20 milliseconds later than the direct sound. And you see, for example, in this room, treatment is used because we have a huge corridor between the red curve, which is diffuse sound, and the green curve, which is direct sound. So this would be a good example how a room can look like if basic absorption, for example, is applied. And I will not go too much into details, but that you know the components. You can then still, of course, reach out to the manufacturers. For the bass range, bass traps are needed. And bass traps are huge and deep. There's no way around it. This is just also physics. You need a lot of material that something becomes effective in the bass range. And always check somehow the measurements the manufacturers show, so they should be able to show it to you, because then you can clearly see where a bass trap, for example, is really effective. For example, this one gets effective at around 80 to 100 Hertz, but not lower, although it's already a really large one. And usually bass traps should just be placed in the corners because there we have most of the bass energy. You can always use air gaps. This can be a very good tool. So if you have the space in your room, just leave an air gap. For example, half of the depth of the bass trap. Also very useful if you don't want to have humidity behind it. I also learned this the hard way when I placed absorbers at one of my walls, and the wall got cold in wintertime, and then something was growing. I don't know why. This is a really good reason for air gaps. And actually, an air gap also makes somehow the performance even better. So for example, the bass trap will absorb a little lower and also absorb a little more if you have this air gap. If you have all of your freedom, you can also, of course, place bass traps, on top. So somehow in these corners between walls and ceiling. This is also, of course, very effective because also there you get a lot of air pressure and a lot of modal reflections and influences. I already spoke about that. This is why a bass trap has to be that deep. It's once again this quarter wavelength rule. So if you want to get rid of 20 Hertz, let's say you really want to, do the complete job, 4.3 meters is then the depth that is easily needed. So it doesn't make that much sense. If you want to dig into this deeper, one more link. This is very useful. It's acousticmodeling.com, and they have wonderful calculators for different types of absorbers. So you can just enter the flow resistivity of the material. For example, check out mineral wool. And then you can add the thickness of the absorber and the air gap. And then you get a really nice calculation how then the absorption looks like. Very useful. And this is just a side note. This is just not really useful. If you have it, get rid of it. Because it only works above, approximately this one works above 2 kilohertz. Luckily nowadays every manufacturer, also the big online dealers, they show that it's only working above 2 kilohertz. And this will just make your room sound really bad if you plaster all of your room with that. Because it's, as I said, only doing something in the heights. There are also tuned bass traps that you can somehow tune to a specific frequency. Let's say you have an issue with 80 Hertz in your room. And then these bass traps use a membrane. And this membrane is dimensioned and tuned to somehow absorb this frequency range. And what's interesting to see is, for example, this is an example from GLK. Their bass trap with the membrane, they are very effective, of course, at the frequency it is tuned for, but it's less effective in the rest of the frequency range. So the blue curve shows the full range version. And and as said, also a recommendation. As you know, for example, GLM makes it possible to easily reduce specific boosts, go for full band. It's just, you get more out of it for the money compared to getting too specific. Reflections in general color the sound. This is exactly the same like you have seen with the bass frequencies. It's just different here because the wavelengths are shorter. So you can get the typical comp filtering that is just sounding, very, like if you would place really notchy filters in the signal and it's changing the moment you are moving your head. Once again, the same principle. You have direct sound, and then you have the reflections that are coming from, for example, the sidewall, and there's a time difference. And then it's just not in phase, or it also can be anti-phase, and then you get these colorations. And one of the basic principles, of course, try to ensure that not that many reflections are hitting your listening area. For example, by placing an absorber there. This is the so-called first reflection point. Always have absorbers at the first reflection point. Or clever studio designers, where you have non-parallel walls. they use something like that, and then the reflections are somehow not hitting. And of course, they still also use absorbers there. And this is how the curve of an absorber looks like, as you can see. Of course, this kicks in later, so this becomes effective at around 300 to 500, and then from 500 on, it's completely somehow also linear. And this, for example, also shows a good absorber or a good material, yeah? That you also have a linearity here. I don't want to have something that is, for example, completely absorbing 1 kilohertz and then doing nothing at 2 kilohertz or doing nothing at 800. It should be balanced. Otherwise, it's also just coloring the sound. And this is also something that is easy to evaluate. For example, you see on the left side, this is an early versus late. So once again, green curve is direct sound, and red curve is diffuse sound with no absorber panels, and then with some absorber panels. This is really only basic stuff. 10 centimeter panels foam, so very inexpensive. And you can already see that above approximately 3, 4, 500, this corridor is wider, so I get a clearer dominance of the direct sound. Same again, just a different way of looking at it. With no absorber panels, my decay time, so the overall time, or the reverberation, I hate this word, the reverberation time is clearly higher, of course, compared to with absorbers. So you see this red and black lines are clearly higher for both speakers. As you see, I'm still not hitting the target on the right side. So the green corridor would be the target for my small room, but it's okay. It's okay. It's not a studio. And then this is now not from my room. This is something else where it could look like in this. Forget about it. This was from my room. I will show it like this. This is the waterfall. And now it's easier to see if I do this. So this is without panels and with panels. And you can see that the complete range, almost above 100, gets shorter and is more controlled. So just use this. So bring in absorbers, place them at the early reflection points, bring in broadband absorption. So if it's possible for you, use bass traps in the corners and evaluate the stuff. So just do your measurements. And believe me, for example, for early reflection points, it makes, of course, sense to find the right positioning. Otherwise, for example, if you just want to have more absorption in the room, you can place it almost everywhere, really. It doesn't matter. So if it's 10 centimeters to the left or to the right, it doesn't matter. It will perfectly just bring down the overall reverberance field and also the diffuse sound. So I'm a huge fan of absorption. And this is one more example how you can evaluate than using the early reflections. This is not that easy to see, but I think probably you can spot on the left side, there's something marked 1. And this is relatively high, so this is higher than 10 dB. So this is an early reflection that is relatively high in comparison to the direct signal. And this was because I just, for demonstration purposes, I just moved my screen in the sound field. And if you then read in this table, reflection number 1 shows a time and distance of 36 centimeters. And this is exactly what was then causing, or what was the distance that is somehow caused by this screen in the sound field. So the traveling path of the sound between direct sound from the speaker and the reflection over somehow the screen was 36 centimeters. And on the right side, it's pushed back, and then this is just gone. So as said, absorbers on the side walls treat your early reflection points. This is very important. Then you can have additional broadband absorbers in the rear of the room. This is now also something I just used from GIK Acoustics, which is actually really a company I can only recommend because it's straightforward. The pricing is fair, and what I really like about it is that they offer you a free advice service. So you can send a room AcouVisort file, or you can send our grade reports to them, and then will just get, a free advice on what they think is needed to treat your room. And of course, there are also a lot of others out there. Don't forget the ceiling. This is something that some people just don't think about, but it's also very, very important, especially if the ceiling is close to you, then also have absorption there. For example, with panels that are just, also sometimes they can, of course, be hung so that they have also, of course, an air gap in between. This is then also, once again, very useful. Yeah, and as said, if you want to check out their website, they have this tool, and then you can just play around with a lot of stuff. So the true reference from my point of view is the interplay between room acoustic treatment and loudspeaker calibration. And you see, I put room acoustic treatment first. Because sometimes people are always thinking that we are promoting go for GLM and just forget about the room and the room acoustics. This is, of course, absolutely not true. But GLM and SAM technology makes it very easier to understand what's happening and to evaluating what's going on. So this is why I think this is a really brilliant tool. And always keep in mind, if you are using an uncalibrated monitor, it can be a perfect studio monitor that has wonderful frequency response in the anechoic chamber. But as you have seen, if it's placed in a room, it changes drastically. And for example, you get a boost in the bass range, then your mixes will just lack bass. And in most genres, this is not really, wanted, that the bass range is not correct. Cool. Yeah, and as said, if you can calibrate your speakers, this just helps a lot. Just skip that one because we already did it. Once again, I want to mention the grade report. As said, you can easily just in GLM go to the services menu and then just select grade report order. And then you will receive approximately 30 pages for a stereo system, more than 100 pages for an immersive system, just showing you all of the details I just spoke about. And this is of huge help also for us in support, because if you send me photos and if I see your grade report, usually I can already tell you something. I'm still not the expert that is on site, of course, but it's very, very useful. Yeah, and you get just different chapters, and all of them also get comments. So there's also very good basic explanations for every topic. That is also programmed the way, for example, that if you have a deeper notch at 80, you will get the specific text, how you can, handle that. Cool. So let's sum this up. How can I listen in reliably? Perfect. That I did not check this last slide. How can I listen reliably? Just, drop the in. So first of all, choose the best possible positioning for the loudspeakers and your listening position. So make sure, for example, speakers are close to the wall, that you don't get notches in the bass range. Check your listening position. If you're sitting, for example, in the middle of the room, there also might be an issue compared to the front third. Sometimes it also, of course, is the height of a speaker. So bring the speaker a little higher and the situation will change. For example, I have an adjustable desk and I indeed get better results if I'm standing. This is just, I have an issue with the floor, which cancels out around 100 Hertz, and this is way better the moment I'm higher, because just, the path then changes. Improve room acoustics, very, very important. Then do your measurements at the listening position to just find out what's exactly happening. And then, as said, use calibrated loudspeakers. Or, of course, use your dip switches, for example. Also not a problem at all. And what's very important then after that is take your time for critical listening. So that you just, first of all, I would listen to reference mixes from, genres you're working in. So don't start with your own mixes, because your own mixes had been done on a, for example, different system, or had been done in a room that was not treated. So it might not be let's put it like that. It might not be perfect. No mix is perfect, but I would start with, reference productions well, and just get used to it. Because let's say, for example, you did a calibration with GLM, the first impression could be, hey, compared to, let's say you had analog speakers before, compared to before, it's now a little thin, or I'm just, missing a little bit of the warmth and of the bass. And then, take your time. If you get used to it, and if you at one moment realize, okay, it's still, it's not that I'm missing bass now, it's more that I get better clarity and that I just have a good feeling now for example, the layering in the bass range, or for example, how I just handle kick and bass and stuff like that. But if you continue to have this feeling, then please use something like the sound character profiler and like a house curve, for example, then make your adjustments that you, for example, lower mids and high frequencies. There's a shelving filter, and you can just bring down, for example, everything above 100 Hertz by 1 to 2 dB, and all good. So I think the cool thing nowadays is with these systems, you don't have to mix like, for example, it sounds wrong for me, but if it's wrong or it sounds like that, then it's right on other systems. I heard this so many times when I was younger, and I'm old, I'm really old. So for example, if it's like this now on my speaker, it's correct in the car. And this is something, you can get rid of if you just, take your time to somehow compare the reference productions, find the right adjustments for you, specifically for you, and then just enjoy doing your own mixes. And I'm pretty sure they will translate better, so that you finally then have this great feeling, for example, to get into your car. And of course, it sounds different in the car, it always does. But for example, that the balance between vocals and music is right, or that the bass range is right, this will then happen. Cool. And now at the end of this nice webinar, here is your link where you can instantly now download the new monitor setup guide. As Aki said, physics stay on version 1.0, so of course it's very similar. But I think it looks now even nicer, and we have, as said, updated a lot of the graphics. And please make use of it. And and I said we will also have different language versions available soon. Translation has just started. I know of Spanish and I know of German, because German is standing here. Cool. And now it's time for your questions. And I think it's almost 90 minutes. So, but we can still do a few of your questions. So I will just go back here. Okay, cool. There are some questions. I will just scroll through them. Sorry. Hello. Stream was glitching. This is always the problem with really live. I always think, let's record it and then let's just upload it. But they want me to do it live. And of course, it will become available later. Sorry for this technical things. It's not in our hands usually. It's, we are using a very popular service called StreamYard. And they are actually one of the good ones. Okay, let's just go for this one about the room EQ wizard. It's a good question, because we are always just starting with this rectangular, boring rooms. And his question is if it has been found useful in non-cubicle rooms, like rooms with tilted ceiling or spaces. Absolutely, Kai, because this is the cool thing. This is also what I try to say. Measure. It would be very hard to simulate that stuff. So for example, if you go for your room mode calculator, I know that they can do a little more complex rooms, but in general, usually it's just the basic stuff. But Room EQ Wizard really tells you the truth, what's happening with your signal. So it just records the sweep, and you will see the influences. And you will also, of course, see these influences in more complex settings. So it might be a little harder to do the planning for acoustic treatment, but Room EQ Wizard itself, or also GLM, of course, is the perfect tool for that. Because we are sending out a sweep and we are comparing this sweep to the somehow perfect sweep, and somehow the size, somehow shape, or also the dimensions of the room do not really matter at that moment. This is important. Someone from Nashville, that's cool. Sorry for my English. And Izzy should do that at some point. It's live. So is this live or pre-recorded? It's really live. This is why we have some technical issues. We have proven that. So just a second. Okay, someone is already sending info from his grade report. This is not for now. Yeah, but otherwise, no questions. Last chance. Okay, perfect. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, this is a very good question. So this is a question about mixed setups with, for example, a SAM subwoofer and then analog monitors. First of all, unfortunately, I have to tell you that 8030 with 7350 is not a good combination. 7350 is the only sub from the SAM sub series that does not have an internal 85 Hertz crossover analog filter. So actually your speakers are getting the complete full range signal if you connect them to 7350. 7360 and higher have this as an option in GLM. You can just, have this checked 85 Hertz standalone filter, but 7350 does not have that. Therefore, it's really not really a good idea to do that. So 8330s would be the logical choice and would be a huge upgrade, because you can, let's talk about a 7360 and then a pair of 8040s, for example. You could do it like this. You calibrate your sub, and then you use Room EQ Wizard to adjust the dip switches of your speakers. And then you send the sweep signal from Room EQ Wizard through the calibrated sub to your speakers to see the complete system performance. And then you can just adjust the level of the sub compared to the speakers. Done. Yeah. The only thing, of course, you cannot turn on and off bass management with GLM, because this is then more like a standalone system. You would save the settings to the 7360. So this is doable. So if you want to do it, always use the combination of GLM and Room EQ Wizard. But is it recommended? No. Because as said, GLM sees the complete system, and very often, for example, people have sometimes SAM speakers and non-SAM sub. What you already saw in my room, the critical thing happens in the bass. So if you calibrate your speakers, but the sub is still only calibrated with dip switches, you will never get the clarity and the precision that is doable with a SAM subwoofer. So what is possible, of course, you could go for a complete analog setup. I just was in the studio and they did that because they had a matrix from Avid, you might know that has filters included with Deadman. And then, of course, you can use this external calibration and use the analog speakers just as your playback system. Then you will still profit from our good acoustic design, from the good enclosures and the drivers and the resolution. But the moment you start mixing things between SAM and non-SAM, then it's usually complicated. And yeah, this would be my reply. So sorry, hopefully you did not get the 7350 for the 8030s. But yeah, but I think we'll find a solution for you. And what's also important, this is one last thing that just came to my mind. Let's say you have a GLM setup and you have 8330s and 8320s in, for example, an immersive setup or surround setup. 8320s only have analog inputs. 8330s have both digital and analog. Problem, if you at some point would like to switch to digital from your source, 8320s are no longer part of the game, because you cannot have mixed setups in GLM. So you cannot have a group that has digital input and analog input activated at the same time. Then you also would have to save settings to the speakers and use them somehow as a satellite that is then controlled, for example, by an external volume controller and stuff like that. So also keep in mind, this is the only downside. 8320s are really wonderful small power guys, but if you think about going digital in the future, then I would go for 8330s straightforward. But there's also nothing wrong with analog, I can tell you, really, believe me. I know a lot of studios which deliver excellent results, and they use even SAM speakers analog, for example, because the console infrastructure is there, or they have a volume controller. So don't be afraid of using analog, although there is this thing happening called double conversion. So technically, of course, it's the best to go straight forward with digital signals, also then somehow setting the volume at the end of the chain with GLM. This is technically the best way, but if it's more just comfortable for you to use an analog source, you know, I would say you would not make a single mixing decisions in a different way. So this is also important to know. Cool. Otherwise, thank you so much. There are still a lot of people online. I'm happy. It's great. Although this was a really long session. So we'll make our best. I will do our best to somehow repair these glitches. So if we upload it again, it should look better. And yeah, otherwise, once again, thank you so much for a fantastic year 25 for us. It was a pleasure to meeting you at so many different, spots of the world. And yeah, have really a nice vacation time. Enjoy Christmas, and yeah, always feel free to reach out to us. We are there between Christmas and New Year's Eve. Support might be a little slower, I can tell you, but otherwise we are already well prepared for 26. So thank you so much and have a good time. Bye.